Hello, bienvenue, welcome back. I hope you're all doing well. Guess what? I finally sat down and watched the second season of The Witcher. And you know how I say that it usually takes about a season for a show to really hit its stride? Well, The Witcher is no different. How many of you are fans of the books or the games? If you're a fan of those, then you're probably not going to be happy with how this season went. But I'll talk a little bit on that later. I'm not really going to go into it because this entire series is supposed to be a starting point. It's meant for anybody to be able to jump into it and enjoy it. You don't need to be a fan with prior knowledge. Now, I didn't particularly enjoy the first season. I'm pretty sure my video for it was called The Witcher. Meh. And that's because it was confusing as fuck. The timeline would just jumped between 3 different periods with no real explanation as to where we were. So really it just made it needlessly complicated. Season 2 has several plots that are spinning all over the place. But you know what? You can actually follow the plot. I mean, what a novel idea. Critically speaking, this season is a huge success. The visuals are stunning, the costuming is gorgeous, and the music is everything you would expect. If you're not a die-hard fan of the books and the games, you are going to love this series. But I will say that as soon as you have an understanding of the characters beyond the show, well, you're in for a bit of a disappointment. And from what I've seen, the internet agrees with me. Eskel turned into a complete asshole. Not to mention that they completely offed him. And then we have this weird changing morality of the characters in different situations. And Yennefer somehow manages to turn off that maternal instinct that has driven her this entire time. And she actually doesn't really have a lot to do in this season. Plus, they kind of forget about Jaskier. And as much as I appreciate the swearing because it is so much a part of this universe, even I found it well over the top. This season just doesn't really vibe with the Witcherverse. But from a critical standpoint, it's much better and a more pleasurable viewing experience. It doesn't surprise me that fans were panning the season. It's just what happens when you have something that comes from such a beloved source material. Writers, producers, creators, they all forget that there are certain expectations that you take on when you start a challenge like this. And the first and foremost is a certain faithfulness to the material. Still, the show touches on a lot of important subjects, like racism and bigotry, and people who are just cloying for power by any means necessary. Plus, Henry Cavill actually does a pretty faithful job of bringing Geralt to the screen. There's lots of monster ass-kicking. And Ciri is really given the time to shine. She's really starting to come into her own, and she's learning to defend herself rather than be the damsel in distress. I'm a bit disappointed with the failure of queer representation in this show, because of the overwhelmingly supportive diversity of the cast otherwise. Okay, so most positions of power are white men, but the cast is still wonderfully diverse, in a way that is not creating token characters of color or making people of color the villain. The Witcher is definitely one of those shows that is challenging the whiteness of fantasy. Another example would be Shadow and Bone, or even Shadowhunters Tried. I've always found it odd that fantasy is such a straight white place. You have all of these different mythical creatures and races. You have different cultures. And yet their moral and social codes are so archaic. It's like homosexuality exists nowhere. In The Witcher, we get a lot of nudity. We get a lot of sex. Men, women, take your pick. We haven't had a canonically queer character make an appearance in the show yet. I mean, we get subtext, but nothing has been made explicitly clear. In Season 2, it kind of steers into the subtext. So it begs the question, are we going to get baited again? And the answer is probably. Writers and producers promised LGBT rep this season, and then definitely failed to deliver on it. Now they're promising it in season 3, so we'll see how that goes. The best we get is Ciri's kind of cute crush on Triss, and then we have Jaskier. I mean, he sings a fucking breakup song about Geralt. But can I just say that I was not expecting that to be hidden under the bard's fashionable attire? I know that, canonically, Jaskier is not queer. That kind of rhymed. But that's why I take such an issue with this leaning so heavily into the subtext. Because we're getting so dangerously close to queerbaiting. But at the same time, we rarely ever get to see that softer side of male relationships, and I do appreciate them trying to represent that. The Witcher does have queer rep. We just haven't seen it in the series yet. But it does exist within the world. The problem is that it's all women. Queerness of women is something that is often explored, especially in a genre that is primarily straight men. It's the hotness factor. Men want to see two women together. I mean, double the boobs, right? There's also the issue of hypersexualizing women in fantasy, or sci-fi, or anything, really. There's only small examples of male homosexuality in the Witcherverse, one being a villain and the other being a very tragic lover's story. The villain isn't even actually gay, he just says he would be gay if it would help him get further in life. So yeah, these are not in the show at all in any way, at least not yet, so we're still lacking that representation. But overall, it's a super fun show, so season 2 is still worth a watch. Hopefully they'll do better in the future.
You were a blood-sucking, joyless hugger. Hugging. We are hugging.
I miss the days when my biggest problem was an ever-present sing-songy twit.
Drink? I'm gonna drink. I am not having this conversation unless I'm drinking.